The city was a living beast, its veins made of asphalt and its heartbeat the endless thrum of traffic horns blaring and subway trains rattling beneath the streets. Towering skyscrapers stabbed the sky, their mirrored windows flashing with the cold. Light of wealth, while down below the sidewalks, churned with people who moved like they were late for something that mattered. Neon signs buzzed above pawn shops and noodle joints, casting a sickly glow over puddles that smelled of oil and yesterday's rain. This was a place that didn't pause, didn't care a machine of motion where the forgotten slipped through the cracks and stayed there. Jamal, a 16-year-old black boy, was one of those forgotten navigating the urban sprawl with the silent skill of someone who'd learned to vanish in plain sight. His frame was wiry hunger carving sharp angles into his cheeks, and his clothes told a story of survival, a green hoodie too big for him, its sleeves frayed to threads, a pair of jeans held together by patches of silver duct tape, and sneakers, so worn the soles flapped like tired wings with every step. A faded backpack slung over one shoulder carried his whole world, a creased photo of his older sister Tasha, who'd disappeared 3 years ago when he was just a kid himself, a plastic water bottle scratched and cloudy from months of refills, and a spiral notebook filled with pencil sketches of the city's underbelly faces, of street vendors, kids playing in fire hydrant spray, the kind of moments no one else bothered to see. Jamal had been homeless since the foster system chewed him up and spit him out at 13, when the last group home decided he was too much trouble, too quiet, too likely to slip away. He'd been on the streets ever since, learning their unwritten rules, which alleys were safe, which dumpsters held edible scraps, which corners to avoid when the cops were in a mood. Tonight, the air was thick with the promise of a storm, the sky sagging under heavy grey clouds that seemed to press the city tighter against itself. Jamal's stomach twisted, a dull ache that had been his companion for days, since his last real meal, a half-eaten sandwich from a church handout. He wove through the downtown chaos, past a food truck, where the scent of sizzling burgers and caramelized onions curled into the air, taunting him with a hunger he couldn't afford to feel. The vendor, a burly man with a stained apron, eyed him sharply, and Jamal kept his head down, knowing better than to linger where he wasn't wanted. He slipped into the crowd, a ghost among the living, as office workers in crisp suits pushed past, clutching briefcases and barking into phones, their voices a jumble of stock prices and dinner plans. Tourists snapped selfies by a graffiti-covered mural, oblivious to the delivery bikes that swerved around them, tires hissing on the wet pavement. No one saw Jamal, no one ever did, and he'd built a life in that invisibility, a shield against a world that had no use for a kid like him. He turned down a side street, where the neon faded and the city's pulse grew quieter, replaced by the hum of a flickering street lamp and the distant wail of a siren. The alley behind Maria's diner was his goal, a narrow strip of concrete tucked between a laundromat and a shuttered pawn shop. The diner's cook, a gruff woman named Rosa, sometimes left a paper bag of unsold food by the dumpster burgers, too soggy for customers, or fries gone cold, treasures to a boy who measured meals by what the city threw away. Jamal's breath puffed. In the chilly air as he approached the alley, the stink of rotting vegetables and spilled soda, mixing with the damp musk of coming rain. His fingers brushed the dumpster's cold metal lid, his movements quick, and practiced ready to lift it and dig through the day's cast-offs. But a sound stopped him, a faint, uneven whimper like a kitten left out in the cold, too weak to cry louder. He froze, his hand hovering, his pulse kicking up not from fear but from something older, something that felt like the memory of Tasha's voice late at night when she'd tuck him in and whisper to look out for the small ones, the ones the world forgets. Jamal squinted into the shadows, his eyes adjusting to the dim light until he saw it. A small shape curled against the alley's brick wall, barely more than a smudge in the dark. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, tiny and trembling, their knees pulled tight to their chest. His first instinct was to run, to keep moving, to stay safe and unseen, but his feet wouldn't budge, pinned by a pull in his chest he couldn't ignore. He took a step closer, his sneakers silent on the slick concrete, and the city's roar dulled to a murmur, leaving only that soft, broken sound drawing him toward it. The shape shifted slightly, and Jamal's breath caught as he realized it was a child. Their thin arms wrapped around themselves, their head bowed as if the weight of the world had settled there. He crouched low, his backpack sliding to the ground, his eyes scanning the alley for danger, a habit carved deep by years of surviving. Alone. The whimper came again, softer now, almost lost in the rustle of a plastic bag skittering across the pavement. Jamal's heart pounded, not with the urge to flee, but with a quiet resolve, a spark of something he hadn't felt in years, the need to protect, to be more than the ghost he'd become. He moved closer still, his shadow falling over the small figure, and whispered a single word into the dark. Hey, his voice steady but soft, carrying a promise he didn't yet understand. The city kept its relentless rhythm beyond the alley's mouth, but in this moment something new was beginning, a fragile thread of connection that would pull Jamal toward a purpose he'd never dared to dream of. Jamal's whisper hung in the damp alley air, unanswered at first, the small shape against the wall staying still, as if afraid to trust the sound of his voice. He crouched lower, his knees brushing the cold concrete, his eyes straining to make out details in the faint light leaking from the street lamp. The child was a girl no older than 7, her thin body curled tight like a leaf in frost, her dress once a soft yellow now smeared with grime and torn at the hem. Her bare feet were scratched and swollen, the soles caked with dirt, and her thick curls were matted into clumps that clung to her cheeks. What stopped Jamal cold was her eyes, unseeing and glassy, staring blankly at the ground, not reacting to his movement, not flickering with the hope or fear he'd expected. She was blind. He realized the weight of it hitting him like a stone in his chest. The whimper came again, softer now, a hiccup of sound that seemed to cost her what little strength she had left. Jamal's breath caught his mind racing with questions. How long had she been here? How had she ended up in this forgotten corner of the city? But he pushed them aside, knowing answers wouldn't warm her or fill the hollow look on her face. He spoke, again, his voice low and steady, like he was coaxing a stray dog. You okay out here? The girl's head tilted slightly toward him, her lips trembling, but no words came, just a faint shake of her head. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, she whispered. Finally, her voice hoarse and small, like it hadn't been used in days. Jamal nodded, even though she couldn't see it, respecting the rule she clung to like a lifeline. Fair enough, he said. I'm Jamal, that's my name, so I'm not a stranger no more. She didn't respond, her fingers tightening around the edge of her dress knuckles, pale against her brown skin. He noticed the bruises, then faint shadows on her arms, older ones fading into new scratches, and something in him twisted, not anger exactly, but a quiet ache that felt like looking at his own reflection. He shifted closer, keeping his movements slow, his backpack still open beside him where he'd set it down. You hungry? He asked, watching her face for any sign. She hesitated, then gave the tiniest nod, her hands twitching like she wanted to reach out but didn't dare. Jamal reached into his bag, his fingers brushing past the notebook and water bottle until he found it, a single apple he'd scavenged from a market stall's discard pile that morning. It was bruised on one side, but firm and clean enough to eat, something he'd been saving for himself when the hunger got too sharp to ignore. Now he held it out, his hand steady. You can have this, he said. It's good, I checked. The girl's nose twitched as she caught the faint, sweet scent, her hands lifting slowly, shaking as they closed around the fruit. She brought it to her lips, biting into it with a care that broke something in Jamal's heart, not gobbling it down like he would have, but savoring each small bite like she was afraid it might vanish. She ate in silence, the only sound the soft crunch of the apple and the distant hum of the city beyond the alley's mouth. What's your name? He asked after a moment, his voice gentle, not pushing. Lila, she murmured between bites, the word barely audible. That's a pretty name, he said, leaning back against the dumpster to give her space. You from around here, Lila? She shook her head, her curls swaying. I don't know where I am, she said, and the lostness in her voice made Jamal's throat tighten. He looked at her again, really looked, taking in the way her shoulders hunched, like she was trying to shrink away from the world, the way her fingers gripped the apple, like it was the only real thing she had. He knew that feeling, knew what it was to be unmoored, to have no one and nowhere to go back to. The city kept moving outside the alley. A delivery truck rumbled past, a woman's laughter echoed from the street, but in this pocket of shadow it was just them 2 kids the world had left behind. Lila finished the apple core, and all her hands folding into her lap like she didn't know what to do with them now. Jamal watched her shiver, a small tremor that ran through her whole body, and realized how cold she must be in that thin dress with no shoes, no jacket. He stood slowly, his knees creaking from the damp concrete, and made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. "My place ain't far." He said. "It's not much, but it's dry, and you can rest there." Lila's head lifted, her sightless eyes searching. "For him you don't have to," he added. "I can stay here with you if that's better." She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded, her hand reaching out uncertainly. Jamal took it gently, her fingers icy in his, and helped her stand, guiding her carefully over the uneven ground. She was light too, light, her steps wobbly like she hadn't walked in a while. They moved through the alley's mouth, ducking past a pile of soggy cardboard and a rusted bike frame, until they reached the back of an old warehouse where Jamal had carved out a corner for himself. His shelter was a lean-to of tarps and plywood propped against the brick wall, a small island of safety he'd built piece by piece. Inside was a single blanket, threadbare, but clean folded on a crate he used as a table, and a battery-powered lantern, hanging from a nail. He flicked it on the dim yellow glow, pushing back the dark just enough to make the space feel human. "Watch your step," he said softly, helping Lila over the threshold. He settled her on the crate, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders, her small frame disappearing into its folds. She sank into it, her body relaxing for the first time since he'd found her, and Jamal sat cross-legged on the ground beside her, his back against the wall. The city's noise filtered through the tarp, the clatter of a distant train, the low buzz of a helicopter overhead. But in here it was quieter, like the world had slowed down just for them. Jamal looked at Lila, her face half lit by the lantern. Her, breathing steady now, and felt something shift inside him. Not hope exactly, but something close, a sense that for once he wasn't just surviving for himself. He didn't know her story, didn't know how she'd ended up in that alley, but he knew she trusted him enough to follow him here, to take his food, to let him guide her. That trust was heavy, fragile, like a glass he was afraid to drop, but it was also the warmest thing he'd felt in years. The rain started then, a soft patter against the tarp, growing steadier by the second, and Jamal knew they couldn't stay long, not with a storm coming, but for now they were safe, and that was enough. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm by the time Jamal and Lila left the shelter, the tarp roof sagging under the weight of water as they stepped into the alley's dim glow. Lila's small hand rested in his, her fingers still cold but steadier, now wrapped in the blanket he'd draped over her shoulders like a cape. Jamal adjusted his backpack, its straps digging into his shoulders, and crouched to let Lila climb onto his back, her arms looping around his neck with a trust that made his chest ache. She was light as a bird, her weight barely noticeable, but her presence was a responsibility he felt in his bones. Lila had murmured something about her home, a place with flowers and a gate, her words vague but enough to spark a direction in Jamal's mind. He pictured the affluent neighborhoods on the city's west side, where manicured lawns and iron fences marked a world apart from the grime of downtown. Getting there meant crossing nearly 12 miles of urban sprawl through rain-soaked streets, and neighborhoods that didn't take kindly to kids like him. Buses were out of the question. No driver would let a drenched homeless teen and a barefoot girl board without fare or questions, and Jamal had neither money nor trust in strangers who wore badges. So he walked his sneakers squelching with every step, the right one splitting wider at the toe, letting cold water seep into his sock. The city unfolded around them, a maze of shuttered storefronts and flickering streetlights, the rain blurring the edges of everything like a smudged drawing. Jamal stuck to back streets, avoiding the main arteries, where police cruisers prowled and pedestrians might stare too long. Lila was quiet at first, her cheek pressed against his shoulder, her breathing uneven as the chill settled deeper into her. "You okay back there?" he asked, his voice cutting through the patter of rain. She nodded against him, her curls damp under the blanket. "I like the sound of the rain," she whispered. "It's like music." Jamal smiled faintly, despite the ache in his legs, her words a small light in the grey. He tightened his grip on her knees, keeping her secure, as he navigated a narrow alley past a chain-link fence where a stray dog watched them with wary eyes. The city's divides became clearer as they moved. Industrial zones with rusted warehouses gave way to strip malls with faded signs, their parking lots empty, except for shopping carts tipped over in puddles. Jamal's shoulders burned his hoodie, heavy with water clinging to his skin like a second weight, but he didn't stop, didn't let himself think about the distance still ahead. Lila's voice broke the silence again. "Do you have a home, Jamal?" Her question soft but piercing. He hesitated, his breath clouding in the cold air used to. He said finally, "But it's gone now." She didn't ask more, just tightened her arms around him, and he was grateful for her silence, knowing some stories were too heavy to tell in the rain. They passed a playground, its swings swaying in the wind, the slide slick with water, and Jamal remembered Tasha pushing him on a swing like that years ago, her laughter louder than the creak of the chains. The memory stung, but it also fueled him, reminding him why he was doing this, why he couldn't leave Lila to the city's mercy. A mile later, they reached a gas station, its fluorescent lights buzzing like angry bees. Jamal paused under the awning, his legs trembling as he set Lila down, gently on a dry patch of concrete. She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter, and he crouched beside her, his hands numb from holding her steady. "We're gonna get you home," he said, more to himself than to her, soon. "Okay." Lila nodded, her unseeing eyes fixed somewhere beyond him, and he wondered what she saw in her mind, what kind of world she carried behind those blank stares. A man in a raincoat stepped out of the gas station, a bag of chips in hand, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at them. "Where's her mama?" he muttered, not quite to Jamal, but loud enough to hear. Jamal's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer, just stood and helped Lila back onto his shoulders, ignoring the man's stare as they moved on. The rain grew heavier now, not a downpour, but a relentless curtain that soaked through the blanket and turned the streets into shallow rivers. Jamal's sneakers were useless now, each step a wet slap against the pavement, his toes prickling with cold. He crossed under a freeway overpass, the roar of cars above them drowning out the rain for a moment, graffiti-covered pillars casting long shadows in the sodium glow. Lila stirred. "Are we close?" she asked, her voice raw from the cold. "Getting there," he said, though he wasn't sure, his mental map of the city blurring under the weight of exhaustion. He'd pieced together a route from Lila's talk of flowers and a gate aiming for the west side, where the rich lived behind high walls, but the exact address was a guess, a hope he clung to like the blanket around Lila's shoulders. By the 5th mile, his back ached, a deep throbbing pain that spread to his arms, but he kept moving one block at a time, past a closed barber shop with gospel music leaking through the cracks, past a laundromat where a woman inside glanced up from folding towels, her eyes softening for a moment before she looked away. Jamal wanted to ask for help, to borrow a phone or a map, but pride or fear or something else kept him silent. He'd learned long ago that help came with strings, and he couldn't risk tangling Lila in them. The city's indifference was a familiar enemy, but tonight it felt heavier, like it was testing him, daring him to give up. Lila's weight grew heavier, not because she was, but because his body was screaming for rest, his lungs tight with each breath. He coughed, a dry rasp that made Lila lift her head. "You okay?" she asked, her small voice sharp with worry. "I'm good," he lied, forcing a steadiness he didn't feel, just hold on tight. She did, her arms a quiet anchor, keeping him grounded as the miles stretched on. The rain didn't let up, blurring the street signs into unreadable smears, but Jamal pressed forward, driven by the image of Lila's home, a place where she'd be warm, safe, wanted. He didn't know what waited at the end of this journey, didn't know if her family would even believe his story, but he knew he couldn't stop, not now, not when she trusted him to carry her through the storm. The city loomed around them, vast and uncaring, but in the space between Jamal's steps and Lila's soft breaths, something small and stubborn grew, a bond forged in the rain, a promise that no distance was too far when it meant getting her home. The rain had become a cold, relentless shroud. By the time Jamal and Lila reached the edge of the west side, the city's gritty pulse fading into quieter streets where lawns were trimmed and streetlights glowed steady. Jamal's legs trembled under Lila's weight, her small body slumped against his back, her breathing slow and ragged from hours in the damp chill. His hoodie was a sodden weight clinging to his skin, his sneakers long past salvage, each step sending water squelching through, holes in the soles. The blanket around Lila was soaked through now, useless against the cold, but she hadn't complained, just clung to him, her trust a silent force pushing him through the ache in his shoulders and the fog in his mind. He'd been walking for hours, nearly 10 miles by his count, guided by Lila's faint mention of a gate and flowers, and his own stubborn hope that he'd find the right place. The neighborhoods had shifted around them, warehouses and strip malls giving way to tree-lined streets, where houses hid behind tall fences, their windows glowing with a warmth Jamal had never known. He didn't belong here. He knew that the way a stray dog knows to skirt certain yards, but Lila did, and that was enough to keep his feet moving. They passed a corner store, its sign flickering in the rain, and Jamal paused under its awning to catch, his breath, his chest heaving as he adjusted Lila's weight. Inside the shop was bright, a contrast to the grey world outside, and a small TV mounted behind the counter played a local news channel, the volume low, but the screen vivid. Jamal's eyes caught on it, a photo flashing across the screen a little. Girl in a clean yellow dress, her curls neat, her smile wide. It was Lila, unmistakable even in the cleaner version of herself, and the ticker below read missing since Monday, last seen near West End Gardens, reward offered. His heart lurched, not from the reward, but from the confirmation that she was wanted, that someone out there was looking for her. A group of teens by the counter glanced at the screen, then at Jamal, one of them squinting. "Yo, that her on your back?" He asked, his tone more curious than accusing. Jamal nodded quick and tight. "Just a friend," he said, his voice low. "We're heading somewhere." The shop clerk, an older man with grey stubble, looked up from his phone, his eyes narrowing as he took in Lila's matted hair and bare feet. "That's the kid from the news," he said, reaching for his phone. "You her brother or something?" Jamal didn't answer, his pulse racing, as he backed toward the door, Lila's arms tightening around his neck, like she sensed the shift. "I got it handled," he said, stepping into the rain before the clerk could press further. The news had given him a name: West End Gardens, a park he knew was close, maybe 2 miles more, and he clung to that like a lifeline. The rain fell harder now, stinging his face, blurring the street signs, but he moved faster, his legs burning with a purpose that drowned out the cold. Lila stirred, her voice barely audible over the downpour. "Is that about me?" she asked, her words trembling. "Yeah," he said, soft but firm. "They're looking for you, Lila. We're almost there." She didn't reply, just pressed her cheek against his shoulder, and Jamal felt the weight of her trust, heavier than her body, heavier than the miles. The final stretch was a blur of quiet streets and looming houses, the kind with driveways longer than some alleys he'd slept in. His body was screaming now, his back a knot of pain, his fingers numb from gripping the blanket to keep it over Lila. He coughed again, a wet rasp that shook his frame, but he pushed it down, focused on the road ahead. The rain had turned the sidewalks into streams, the water ankle-deep in places, and he waded through, careful not to slip, not to let Lila feel his faltering steps. At last he turned a corner and saw it, a tall iron gate, flanked by brick pillars, a driveway curving toward a mansion that looked like it belonged in a painting. Lights glowed through wide windows, soft and golden, a beacon in the storm. Jamal's breath hitched, his legs nearly buckling as he reached the gate's call box. He pressed the button, his hand shaking from cold and exhaustion. Nothing happened. He pressed again, harder, his voice hoarse as he leaned in. "I found her, I found Lila." A crackle, then silence. 30 seconds stretched like years, the rain pounding down until the gate finally groaned and swung inward. Jamal stumbled forward, Lila still on his back, the driveway stretching endless before him. The front door of the mansion opened before he reached the steps, a woman in a silk robe, her face streaked with tears rushing out, followed by a man in a tailored coat, his eyes wild with something between hope and fear. Lila stirred her head, lifting. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice breaking, and the woman let out a sob, dropping to her knees on the wet marble porch. Jamal knelt carefully, easing Lila down her bare feet, touching the dry stone as she wobbled, then reached for the woman's voice. The man joined them, his arms wrapping around Lila. "Baby girl," he choked out, his voice thick with relief. Jamal stepped back, his hoodie dripping water pooling at his feet, his heart pounding so loud he thought it might burst. The woman was crying now, holding Lila like she might disappear again. The man murmuring thanks to a god Jamal wasn't sure he believed in. A staff member in a crisp uniform appeared, ushering them inside the door, starting to close behind them. Jamal raised a hand halfway. "She's safe now," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain, and before anyone could turn, before anyone could ask his name, He turned and walked back into the storm. His legs shook, his body screamed for rest, but he kept moving, the mansion's glow fading behind him, swallowed by the rain's grey curtain. He didn't look back, didn't let himself think about the warmth he'd left behind or the questions he hadn't answered. Lila was home, that was what mattered, that was enough. The city closed around him again, its indifference unchanged, but something in Jamal felt different, lighter, like he'd carried more than a girl across those miles, like he'd carried a piece of himself back to life. He didn't know what came next, didn't know if the world would remember what he'd done, but in that moment, under the rain's endless song, he felt seen not by the city but by himself. And that was a start. The rain had eased to a drizzle as Jamal trudged away from the mansion, his soaked hoodie clinging to his shivering frame, his sneakers squishing with every step. Exhaustion weighed him down his legs, shaky from carrying Lila through the storm, his cough a raw scrape in his throat. He found a bus stop awning 5 blocks away, collapsing against the plexiglass wall, knees pulled to his chest. The city pulsed around him, cars hissing through wet streets, a siren wailing in the distance. But Jamal felt distant, like he was floating outside himself. Lila's reunion replayed in his mind, her small voice calling for her mother the way her parents' faces broke with relief. He'd done it, she was safe, and that truth warmed him even as the cold seeped deeper. His eyes drifted shut, sleep pulling at him despite the hard concrete beneath him. He didn't know a blurry security video of him leaving Lila at the gate had gone viral. Captioned, "Unknown teen saves girl in storm, then disappears." Shared thousands of times, it sparked headlines dubbing him the Rain Boy, but Jamal slept through the buzz, curled tight under the awning. He dreamed of Tasha, her voice urging him to keep going, not to let the world erase him. Morning came grey and damp, and Jamal woke stiff and hungry, his stomach a sharp knot. He headed downtown, aiming for a church that left food bags by its back. Tore his steps slow but steady. Behind a convenience store he rummaged through a dumpster, finding half a muffin still wrapped. A voice interrupted, firm but kind, "You're him, aren't you?" Jamal looked up, heart-skipping, as he saw a tall man in a dark coat, rain beading on his shoulders. Marcus, Lila's father, crouched to his level, eyes steady with gratitude. "You brought my daughter home. He said she told me about the apple, the blanket, how you carried her." Jamal's throat tightened. "I just wanted her safe," he mumbled, staring at the pavement. Marcus nodded, handing him a thermos of hot coffee, its warmth a shock to Jamal's numb fingers. He sipped, flinching at the heat, but savoring it. Marcus sat. Beside him on the curb, the act simple but heavy. "Lila's recovering," he said. "She talks about, you keep saying Jamal kept me warm." Jamal's eyes stung and he looked away, blinking fast. "I wasn't after thanks," he said, voice low. "I know, Marcus replied. "That's why I'm here." He paused. "You don't belong out here, not someone who'd walk miles in the rain for a stranger." He offered a hand, a place to stay, school, a job at my community center. Jamal hesitated, distrust warring with the memory of Lila's trust. Marcus's gaze held no pity, just respect, and that tipped the scale. Slowly, Jamal took his hand, the grip solid, a promise of something new. The city loomed indifferent as ever, but in that moment, Jamal felt seen, not just surviving, but starting to live. A month after the stormy night when Jamal carried Lila home, the city's pulse remained unchanged, its streets alive with honking cabs and neon glow. But Jamal's world had shifted. Marcus's promise became reality. A small apartment in a foundation-owned building, with a bed, a table and a window, framing a community garden's bright marigolds. For Jamal, who'd known only alleys and tarps, it was a quiet miracle, though he still woke some nights heart racing, expecting to find himself back on concrete. His old backpack rested in a corner, now beside a school bag, heavy with books for a community program, where teachers saw his potential, not his past. He was behind, struggling with algebra, but showed up daily, pencil sharp, his sketches of the city filling a new notebook. At Marcus's community center, Jamal worked part-time sorting donations and guiding kids in art classes, their chatter easing the guard he'd worn for years. Lila was often there, her recovery steady, her white cane tapping as she moved with growing confidence. At a courtyard event with music and grilled hot dogs, Lila insisted Jamal sit beside her, spilling juice as always, then laughing her hand, finding his sticky and sure. "You're my hero," she said, her voice bright, and Jamal's chest warmed, his smile easier now. Marcus and Eleanor watched nearby, their gratitude unspoken, but clear in their nods. Eleanor had hugged him once, tears in her eyes, and Marcus showed respect, in quiet ways asking about his drawings or trusting him with center tasks. They called him family, inviting him to dinners, where Lila's stories filled the air and Jamal ate slowly, marveling at a full plate. He thought of Tasha, her absence softer now, lifted by Lila's trust, a reminder he'd kept his sister's call, to protect the vulnerable. During the event, Jamal sketched Lila, her smile bold on the page, and described it to her at her insistence, his words painting what his pencil caught. She listened, head tilted, their bond a thread woven in rain and kindness. Later, by his apartment window, Jamal watched the skyline, its towers sharp but less daunting. His notebook lay open. Lila's sketch, a testament to a life no longer just survival. He'd been invisible once, a ghost in the city's margins, but now he was a student, a worker, a brother to Lila in spirit, if not blood. The city hadn't changed, its indifference a constant, but Jamal had found his place, a space where one selfless act had rippled outward, proving even the smallest kindness could shift a life. He closed the notebook, ready to join Lila in the garden, her laughter a call to a future he was learning to claim, one steady step at a time. Jamal's journey from the shadows of the city to a place of belonging showed the quiet power of compassion. His choice to carry Lila home wasn't just about saving her, it was about saving himself, finding purpose in a world that had tried to erase him. Their story, a beacon in the urban sprawl, reminds us that even in the coldest places, a single act of care can spark hope and build a home not of walls but of hearts.